Welcome to the Uncommon Living podcast, where we talk about the science, technology, and practical wisdom that builds physiological and psychological resilience. I'm Thomas Seager. I'm an associate professor in the School of Sustainable Engineering at Arizona State University and CEO of the Morales Coforge Ice Bath Company. My guest today is Dean Hall. Dean is a trauma therapist and a cancer survivor. His story of how he healed his chronic leukemia and lymphoma using cold water swimming and forest bathing is an inspiration that is moving us beyond the biohack and getting us back to the biohave. Dean Hall, thanks for coming down from Oregon to visit us here in Phoenix.
Well, I am thrilled to be here, not only to see one of my favorite people, but to finally see where the Morales Co. is forged.
Everything happens right here.
Yeah.
It's all handcrafted. We start with the lumber and the metal, and we go all the way to an ice bath.
Man.
And we've come a long way since we shipped yours. Yours was the first one.
2018?
Yeah, I think that sounds, or 19.
Or
it must
19.
have been 19.
Was it?
Yeah, you were the first one we shipped out of state.
Yeah, I remember I was spending about $70 in bags of ice every month. And I'd just gotten on Instagram and I found you guys and I thought, you know, there's no way they're going to want an old man to be their poster boy. But why not throw a Hail Mary? And you guys were just absolutely so incredibly lovely to me, that, especially you, that not only did it work out as far as a nice give and take, but a wonderful friendship.
I remember getting to know you and thinking, look, I don't know if this guy's story is true or not, but
I get that a lot.
You know, right? I thought, but he seems like he's willing to be the guinea pig. We don't really know what we're doing in this business. We don't know how to ship. If we send him one and it gets all screwed up, he doesn't seem like he's going to be too mad at us. Let's give it a shot.
It's better than $70 in ice a month.
That's right? And you had the right perspective, I thought. But then I went to the library and I started reading more about cancer and its metabolic origins. I started reading more about the way the cold exposure would catalyze a series of changes in the metabolism that will inhibit the growth of tumors, and in your case, reverse cancer.
Right.
Then I became a believer.
That's the beauty of relationship and community and friendships that are dynamic. They start as fun, but then you meet people, and even my oncologist really wouldn't spend much time. He was world-class researcher, number 3 in the world, Juanario Castro from University of California, San Diego. And he was a wonderful man, but he didn't really want to take the time to explain to me why it happened or how. And so one of the interesting things in our friendship is your mind got to going and you explained to me this thing. All I could refer to it as prior to your explanation was a miracle. Well, that's so loosey-goosey that it even cast more aspersions on my story at that time. Yeah.
We're going to get to your story, which I think many of our viewers are vaguely familiar with. They might know that you reversed leukemia with cold water swimming.
Right.
And you wrote a book about it called The Wild Cure.
Right.
But that was not your first encounter with cancer. Will you take me back to your earliest experiences?
My first encounter with cancer was my father also got chronic leukemia. Back in the late 90s, 2002, he was not doing well. As a matter of fact, the leukemia was really taking over and beating him up, and the insurance allopathic medicine-driven program that he was in wasn't helping at all. Thankfully, he's a fairly wealthy man and kind of a go-getter. And so he's like, I usually, when I mention my dad, I just go into his voice. He's like, well, this is a bunch of crap. I'm going to do something about this. I got the money. And he sounds exactly like that. And so he found Juan Ario Castro and paid out of pocket for him. And within 6 months, he was doing better using still experimental drugs, the same pharmacological approach. But I saw at that time that it is possible to recover from cancer. And being a marriage and family therapist, I'd had hundreds of clients come through with cancers, especially in this tiny little rural Kansas town that I'd been living in, because it was just a toxic wasteland because they'd sprayed so much DDT from the 50s to the 70s. And then also we had an oil refinery that had, I am convinced, polluted the water table. There was such an incredible incidence of Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, blood cancers, and brain tumors in that tiny little town that you really couldn't throw a stick without hitting somebody that had cancer at the time.
But chronic leukemia is different than acute leukemia. Will you tell us about your understanding?
Yeah, chronic leukemia is slow acting. You're usually not going to die from it. If you're going to pick your leukemias, that's preferable. Acute leukemia is very fast acting, and it's invasive, and it's much more troublesome. And if you don't mind me skipping ahead, I was diagnosed with a leukemia of some sort. The oncologist, and one of my good friends is a family practice doc that's just brilliant. He reminds me a lot of you. If you were to take you and make you a real redneck, put you in some boots and a dip of skull, you'd have Aaron Waters. But just a brilliant guy, just love him. And he sent me to several, well, at least my numbers, to several different world-class oncologists. And I had features for the first 2.5, 3 weeks of both acute and chronic, and they'd never seen anything like it. And at first they said, boy, let's hope it goes to one or the other, because maybe we can treat it. But if it doesn't, my numbers were going up by the hundreds of thousands every day or so. And they said, you got maybe 4 weeks, 6 weeks tops. And so that was terrifying that first time. Thankfully, in about the 3-week mark, it settled down into chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which this same doctor, Aaron Waters, called it mono on crack. I had it pretty terribly. And so even to get up and take the 20 steps to the ensuite bathroom, I knew I was in bad shape because I'd done triathlons for a number of years. And when you do, especially a full triathlon, a full Ironman, you learn how to do what I call crawl back inside your head and get your body to do what you don't think it can. And when I was using that same technique just to get to the bathroom, I knew I was sick. And it took me about a year to start to recover. As soon as I did, I had my first real near-death experience. I've woken up in the hospital 3 times in my life where the doctor or a nurse said, whoa, we didn't think you're going to make it. Are you awake? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, wow, we called your family. We didn't think you're going to make it. And that first time in 2008 was from pneumonia. My immune system was struggling so much. I couldn't get any traction on this pneumonia, and I'd cough and cough and cough and then pass out. And one of those times I didn't wake back up. So that was 2008, and luckily about mid-2008 I started getting better. And I was on prednisone. So many times they told me I can't take any more. Good luck. Thankfully, I was able to get off of it and proceed to get better. And then
So at this point, neither you nor your dad are doing anything cold, nothing biohacking. It's all just to the traditional allopathic stuff.
Right. I mean, I had seen so many of my clients and my father be devastated by chemo and radiation, and I'd read enough about it. To me, I call chemo the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And you don't start a war dropping the bomb.
Right.
You know, you try to fight a few battles first. And so that was the approach I took. I always wanted to hold it off until there was no other answer. And so I did all the lifestyle changes. I'd never really slept because I'm so ADHD. I'm glad they didn't have that back in my childhood because I probably would have been heavily drugged. But I really tried to start sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours a night. Tried to get in 9, which I never had, which it just seemed really crazy. And I was in what I would call a nutritional wasteland, you know, small town Kansas, 4 miles from the Oklahoma border. To get really good organic fresh produce, you're not going to. And so I tried to switch toward eating better foods, not heavily processed, heavily fried, which is what I'd been eating my whole adult life. Lots of corn syrup. Then I also, of course, did what I always did. I thankfully come from a very athletic family. Both my parents were mountain climbers in Oregon. We were the only ones in the 60s who had a home gym that I knew of, but it was just because they wanted to climb. And so I got back to moving my body and getting on my bike and doing all those kinds of things. But even when I swam the Willamette in 2014, I'd never heard of ice baths or Wim Hof. I didn't hear of Wim Hof until about 8 months after my swim was successful. And I was giving a speech, and people came up to me afterwards and says, "Well, have you heard of Wim Hof?" And I thought they were talking like about a coffee maker. I thought maybe it was competing with Keurig or something. But when I looked him up, I was fascinated. Yeah.
So you're recovering, you're starting to take care of yourself, make some of the lifestyle changes that you knew would support your immune function, your overall health, but you got some bad news about Mary.
Yeah, I thought we'd finally learned the lessons that we needed to. And I was really excited because we'd both worked really hard. We're from that generation where you pay your dues and you work hard and you build up a mountain of money and then you live off of it. And I don't know, it's just weird cultural brainwashing for my generation. But we were finally at that tipping point where life was paying off. Mary was 52, I was 50. And I thought, okay, here we go. And then just as soon as I thought that, life yanked it back, and she was diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. And it just happened all so fast. There weren't any of the typical warning signs. She didn't have terrible headaches. She didn't have memory lapses. She didn't have dizzy spells. All the things I'd seen other people in the community, because when I left the community in 2012, Mary died in 2010, in a town of 12,000, and that's counting all the dogs and cats, there were probably about 9,000. There were 13 people who had active brain tumors.
Wow.
Yeah, there were 22 who had blood cancers, and there were like 18 or 19 who had Parkinson's. I mean, the rates were just enormous. And so she had this brain tumor, and by the time we caught it, we got up to one of the world's best neurosurgeons. Aaron pulled some, my doctor friend pulled some favors, and because he was on the KU Board of Medicine, and got us up to Kansas City. And the neurosurgeon looked at the film and he said, there's nothing we can do. He said we could do laser-guided surgery, and if that went perfectly, there's an 80% chance we'd nick a blood vessel and she'd bleed out on the table. An 85% chance we'd nick a nerve and she'd be a paraplegic or a quadriplegic. And then, even if it was successful and neither of those things happened, we could only probably get 50% of the brain tumor, because brain tumor operations are as successful and hopeful to the degree that they're high in the brain and forward. And hers was all the way down back as far as it could go around the brainstem, and a lot of ganglia. And so he said, then you'd have to go to MD Anderson for 3 to 6 months and do as much chemo and radiation as her body will stand. And I said, well, does that give us a chance? And he said, no, it would probably just give her 6 more months. And I said, well, what would her quality of life be? And he said, imagine having a constant migraine and the flu all at the same time. I said, well, we're not doing that. What if we don't do that? Will she be in a lot of pain? He said, no, typically not. She'll just lose more and more of her faculties and sleep more and more and then die in her sleep. And 52 days later, she was dead, and 15 days for our 30th anniversary. Yeah.
So now you've lost your wife.
Yeah.
How old was your daughter Bree at the time?
She was going into her senior year. Mary died October of her senior year in high school. 15 days later, she turned 18.
There's a lot for a man to piece his life back together when he's faced with a loss like that. What was that like for you?
Well, the ironic thing is I was considered a grief expert in the Midwest. And I even called a couple of my old clients and apologized.
Yeah.
Because being faced with it firsthand, experientially, it was so much worse than I ever imagined. And it's worse, it's bad for everyone. But for me, I think it was much worse than most, because before we got married, I come from Portland, Oregon. I came down to Kansas to play ball. And Mary said, you know, I love you, but if you want to marry me, I'd love to. But I'm close to my family, and I didn't go up to Oregon. You got to stay down here. So I thought about it for about 6 months, and it just, you know, I was young and dumb, and it seemed like a great idea, and like I couldn't live without her. So I told all my friends I was putting myself in exile for love. Well, I was still okay with that, but living in this small town, everyone knowing that I came from Portland, Oregon, and that being such a tiny little town, if your grandparents didn't grow up there, you were an outsider. And I taught there for 20 years and then was a therapist for 20 years there as well. And still, most people referred to me as Mary's husband.
Right.
They didn't call me by my name. And I didn't realize how insidiously that, because I was so young, I was just early 20s. I don't even know if I was through puberty yet. But it insidiously created my adult identity. And all of a sudden, I wasn't Mary's husband, and I didn't know what to do. Right. And the astonishing thing was, as soon as she was dead, I'd lived in this town for 30 years, and it was kind of like I was dead too. Like, you're an outsider. What? And not everyone was that way, but I got that a lot.
So it's important for our viewers to understand this backstory, because without knowing how you got there, I don't think anyone would believe that a sane person would decide they're going to swim the entire length of the Willamette River and take 3 weeks to do it.
Yeah.
But it didn't happen all at once.
No.
You were going through this grief, and yet you weren't out of the woods on your own cancer journey.
Not at all. As a matter of fact, I was going down the rabbit hole. By August of 2013, when I first decided to swim the Willamette, I was 152 pounds. I'm 6'1", And right now I'm right at 212, 215. I was ugly with a capital Ugg. I mean, my family laughs and says I've never been a pretty boy, but it was really bad. I looked like and this is not intended to compare me to those that went through the Holocaust, but I really looked like I'd walked out of Auschwitz. You could see every rib.
Emaciated.
Oh, beyond emaciated and disfigured, because the first time I had leukemia, I didn't have a lymphoma. But the second time, I had over 70 lymph nodes that were swollen, and some to the point, like under my jawline, they were so swollen it kind of disfigured my face. And then I had what my oncologist lovingly called my hockey puck under my right arm, because it was the size and shape of a hockey puck.
Well, grief is not a good thing for the immune system.
No.
It must have taken a lot out of you, a lot out of your ability to fight your own cancer when you lost your wife.
Right.
And you told me that there was a really dark moment.
Yeah. Yeah, one day in August 2013, I woke up and I'd made a practice for the previous 3 years of never looking in the mirror because I didn't recognize myself. And when I did look in the mirror, it was so discouraging. And one day I walked into the bathroom and thoughtlessly I glanced up. And I was shocked at how really emaciated I looked. And I had red-rimmed eyes. And that poor guy just looked so sad that it just broke my heart. And I thought, you know what? I could just let this thing take me. And nobody'd know, and I wouldn't have to leave a note, and nobody'd know the wiser. And
Nobody would blame you either.
No. But as soon as I did, you know, my daughter Bree had by this time she was 21, 22, and she'd been through so much, and she was still really struggling. As a matter of fact, typically when a later teen loses a parent, the research, and Bree was right in line with this, there's about a 4 to 5 year lag before they even start grieving, before they come out of the shock of it, because they're in that launching mode and they're in that pull away mode, and it's nature is so strong in that instinct to pull away from the parents that then all of a sudden when you lose a parent back there, you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what just happened? I need to attend to this. And so I thought, this is an entirely selfish thought. You know, at this point, my life does not need, or should it be, about me. It's got to be about her. And I need to do whatever I can do to recover and regain my health.
What could you do?
Well, I had worked with many folks, cancer patients and otherwise, that had been traumatized or down in the depths of tragedy, and helped them come back using Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning. And he actually was from Auschwitz. And then also spent some time in Bergen-Belsen. And he found, astonishingly, that the more passionate a person was about a purpose, the greater likelihood they would survive the camps. And his original hypothesis was the more fit, the strong, the more healthy, the more they would have a chance to survive. But as he watched over the years, he would write little notes on scraps of paper and put them in the cracks in the wall so the guards wouldn't get them. But he kept fairly studious notes, and he found that the more passionately held the purpose, the greater chance. Didn't matter how big, how strong, it was just that passion and the purpose. And so I knew if I could find something I could become passionate about again, then perhaps I had a chance. And so I started looking. And it was crickets. It was just nothing. I mean, all the things I'd done before, I had had a fairly successful speaking career. I couldn't even say my name or talk about the weather without crying at this point. I knew that wasn't going to go well, and I didn't have the bandwidth for it. I'd written a book, but it was on date rape, and the subject matter is so difficult. I just didn't have the bandwidth for it. I had had a private practice, a very successful one, but I thought sitting and listening to people and thinking, what the hell's wrong with you? That's not even half as bad as what I'm doing. It's not a great place.
Not in the right state of mind. Yeah.
Not to be a good therapist. And so any of the things that I'd previously done just didn't make sense. So one of the things that I used is I had learned, the research had come out in the early 2000s, that the brain, by its very nature, has to answer every question you ask. It cannot not answer. It can't refuse. And so we've all experienced it with trivia. What's that guy's name? A day later, a few hours later, you're brushing your teeth or something that pops into your mind. And probably not your mind. The rest of us, Tom, that happens to. I'm telling you something you probably know not of. But what a lot of people don't know, and what I used many times to my benefit, is if I have a deep question in life, I ask it prayerfully, the same way I would if I wanted to remember who George Washington's mother-in-law was, and then let it go, and then think about it again, really crunch down on it, focus on it, let it go, and then all of a sudden it'll come to me. Well, the longest I'd ever had to wait was about 10 days. 6 weeks later, it's still crickets. And I'm just going down. I knew I was in trouble. I'd never really binge watched anything in my life. And I knew I was in trouble when I was watching that TV series, The Walking Dead.
I don't know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a zombie apocalypse.
All right.
And I realized, I'm like, why am I doing this? And I realized, oh, I understand both sides. I feel and look like a zombie, and I've had an apocalypse. So it makes sense to me. But I just wasn't moving forward in life at all. And so one time I just got into a meditative state and prayerfully asked, and I wasn't going to stop till I had an answer. And about an hour later, nothing came to me, and I opened my eyes, and I'd been living in this little duplex, renting for the first time in 30 years, which to me seemed like a real failure. And I thought, well, while I wait for God or the universe to answer me, maybe I should unpack. I hadn't even unpacked. I was still living on a mattress on the floor like a frat boy. I was in that terrible of a state. I thought, okay, maybe it's time for me to be an adult before the universe answers me. And so as I started to unpack, my mom had packed a box of my childhood things. And I started unpacking it. And there was a journal I'd been forced to keep in the 6th grade when I was 11 years old, because the boy I was would never have kept a journal. So I opened it, and it said, when I get old, I gotta climb Mount Everest, swim the English Channel. And when I read that, an electric shock, to this day, I still get goosebumps talking about it. I'd forgotten that boy that just wanted to be a wild adventurer, that just wanted to go and do cool things because my parents had. And I'd met several men who'd climbed Everest, and 2 of them were sponsored by National Geographic. And I just pour over National Geographic every month and devour it and then reread it. I was such a nerd. And so that's all I wanted to do. And so I thought, well, my immune system probably couldn't handle elevation and probably not the food at Kathmandu. But I can swim the channel. And so I Googled to see if anybody had ever swum the channel. And, it was an active cancer patient.
Right.
No one had. So at first, the first few months, that was my goal. Yeah. And so the very next day, I got in the pool.
So the goal got you going.
Yeah.
And you switched your sights.
Yeah. About Christmas, I was getting out of the pool, And the thought occurred to me, who cares if another middle-aged man puts on a Speedo and swims to France? It does the world no good. And in my case, it's not going to be a pretty picture. So what could I do that would do the world more good? Well, in 1984, I'd gone out to Portland for a bicycle race and done fairly well. And so we had this family celebration dinner, and it was on the banks of the Willamette. And growing up, the Willamette was just an oil slick. And I had been away for about 8 years. And there we were on this beautiful blue, big-shouldered river. And there were waterfowl and beautiful flora and fauna. And it was just such an electric blue and such a beautiful moment that I just stared at it. And finally my dad came down and he's like, what's going on? And I said, man, this looks so good. And he's like, yeah, really proud of Oregon and what we're doing to bring it back, and it's getting cleaner. You can even swim in it now. And I said, hey, has anyone ever swum this whole thing? Thinking he'd pat me on the back and say, that's my boy. Because he'd run all of the world's major marathons, and he'd climbed every mountain on the West Coast. I mean, this man was an adventurer, kind of hard to live up to. And I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but if it wasn't hard enough to be his son, he was such a man that instead of going by Richard, he went by Dick. He's man enough, and his name's Dick. Introduce him to your friends when you're in middle school. But instead of patting me on the back, he's like, where do you come up with that crap? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Well, that was...
Now you know you're on the right track.
Yeah. That was like sticking the harpoon in, man. I knew I had to do it then to show the old man he's wrong. And so I started planning. I got all sorts of maps. I mean, I just became obsessed with it. Went home, and I'm poring over these maps of the Willamette, planning every stage, thinking, man, because one of my majors is in history, world history. And to think that I've got the chance to become the first person in history to do something. I mean, how many people can say that? And so it was kind of an ego-driven thing. I was 25. And my wife stopped me and she's like, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm going to swim the Willamette. I showed her all the maps, and she's like, well, how long is that going to take? I said, probably 3 weeks next summer. And she's like, 3 weeks, huh? I said, yeah. And she's like, and so you're just not going to work for 3 weeks? I said, well, I guess not. She's like, we're saving up to buy a house. How are we even going to pay our bills, much less save? Yeah.
So the Willamette was a dream postponed from your youth.
30 years.
Came back to you in this crisis.
Later. Right.
And now you're going back to your maps and you're rekindling this planning of this adventure.
Yes.
Okay, but what did your Dr. Aaron say?
He said not only no, but hell no. Because the year previously, 2012, was another moment I almost died. I woke up because I was trying to prove to Bree, we were down on in southern Oklahoma in a gigantic man-made lake. And I wanted her to know that her dad was strong and he was going to beat this thing. So I said, hey, B, would you feel better if I swam all the way across and back? And it was about 1.5 miles across, so it's about a 3-mile swim. And she's like, it seemed like old times. And so I did, not knowing that this thing, because it's like 110 out there, and it's a man-made lake.
It's a stormwater retention pond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was a petri dish.
Yeah.
And unknowingly, I swam through blue-green algae and didn't have a nose plug on, of course, because what dork wears a nose plug, right? And so it went up my nose, the neurologist thinks. And, you know, you've got a semi-permeable membrane there between your sinuses and your brain. And so I got viral meningitis. And boy, that was hellish. I lost 60 pounds. In like 8 days. I was out for 3, and they didn't think I was going to make it. I came back, thankfully, but when I came back, I really didn't recognize myself, and I had had such a high temperature that when I woke up and looked at myself, I had lesions and scabs all over my body, even my tongue. I didn't know you could get a scab on your tongue. I had heard, growing up in a fairly conservative household, we went to church a lot, so I knew the story of Job, and I'm like, this has now become very Job-like. I've got scabs all over my body. My wife's not alive to tell me to curse God and die, but maybe I'll just do that myself. And it took me 6 months to come back from that, and I'd gotten so excited about this thing. I'd literally forgotten I'd almost died from swimming the year before.
Okay, but Aaron did not forget.
No.
Aaron reminded you.
Yeah, he did. And I said, well, I'm going to do it. And he's like, please do just one thing. And I said, what's that? He's like, wear a nose plug. He's like, it's going to make you look like a dork, but you kind of already do. And I said, yeah, it's not a problem. If you think that'll, and he's like, it's still not safe. Your immune system's so bad. But it gives you your best chance. And so to this day, even though I'm very fit, very strong, very healthy, my numbers are all great, I barely even get in the bathtub without a nose plug on.
Okay, so at this point in your life, you're searching for meaning.
Yeah.
You need a reason to go on. It sounds like you have no idea what this might do to your leukemia.
Well, I did have an idea, and Juanerio Castro did too. We thought it'd kill me.
Yeah.
We thought it would either, we didn't really think it would kill me, but we had chemo and radiation planned for a week or 2 after the swim, because he said the pollution in the water or whatever, at first he said the water being 40 to 45 degree Fahrenheit, it will be such a challenge to my body, such a constant threat, that it will really ruin me, and I might not even be able to make it the entire distance. But if I'm hell-bent on doing this, do what I can, then get my butt down to San Diego as quickly as possible, and then if I have to, go back and finish it another time. That's what I went into thinking, but I thought, I don't want to die watching TV on a couch. If I'm going to die, and I thought I was, I want to leave my daughter with a legacy of courage, and that she saw me trying to do something big. Yeah.
She went with you. She was in the canoe.
Not that time. No, she went later. I went and took Bobby right after we just got married, and my daughter to Ireland, and I became the first person in history to swim their longest river, the River Shannon, in 2017.
So who was your support team for the Willamette?
My dad.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was my guide boater. I had 6 guide boaters, and the Willamette River Keeper, an environmental organization, really supported me, gave me all sorts of maps, helped me contact all sorts of people. They were absolutely wonderful. They were really excited that I was crazy enough to do this thing, because they wanted people to become aware of how rich and beautiful the Willamette's become. And they thought this would really showcase it.
Did you tell them you probably weren't going to make it?
Well, they saw me and they knew I had cancer, but they thought, if you're crazy enough to try, we're crazy enough to help you. And they just did. It wouldn't have been possible without them. So it was really, really a wonderful experience and collaboration.
You experienced hypothermia. You started without even the right dry suit, and you experienced, even after you got the suit, hypothermia at several times during your swim, according to what you wrote in the Wild Cure.
Yeah, no, I was wearing a 3 mil wetsuit, a triathlete wetsuit, but at 40 to 42 degrees, the first 16 days were anywhere from 40 to 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And after about 40 to 45 minutes of swimming, because I wasn't wearing anything on my hands or feet, on my face, of course, except for my goggles. And I'd go into fairly significant thrombosis, and I knew I was having trouble when I'd go from shivering to I could feel my internal organs banging against my rib cage. And so we'd stop, and I just thought, oh, so this is why I'll be the first person to do it. Yeah, nobody's gonna put up with it. I just thought it was the hardest test. And I knew to be the first person in history, if you want, my mantra at the time is, if you want what nobody has, you got to be willing to do what nobody does. And nobody's willing to do that for 8 to 10 hours a day. I was swimming on the average of 10 to 12 miles a day, which is a full Ironman is 3.3, so a marathon's 3. So I was doing about anywhere from 3 to 4 marathons a day for 22 days in 40-degree water. And so every 45 minutes, and my dad would watch me, and about every 15 minutes try to talk to me a little bit if I'm slurring my words. He knows it's time for me to get out. And I'd have to get out on the riverbank, run in place, do jumping jacks. And once I'd kind of warmed up, then I'd sit down and drink some warm tea, eat as many calories as I possibly could, and then get back in and do it again. And that was the hardest part of the whole thing. And I think it's such a beautiful metaphor, because I think it fits with all of the rest of my understanding of life. Many times the thing that is our greatest challenge is the thing that heals us, if we allow it to. And that's exactly what was happening. I had no idea whatsoever.
You lost a lot of body fat.
Aaron, the doctor, wanted to come out because he'd been through this journey the whole time, and we'd been friends for, 15 years by then, just really close friends. And so he was going to come out because the Leukemia Lymphoma Society that I partner with was going to have a big gala event, and I invited him to be a part of that. And then I thought I would finish around day 18, but it took a little longer. And so he came out on day 16, and he had his skin fold calipers. And he's like, geez, Dean. Well, that's not exactly what he said. I cleaned it up a bit. And he's like, you're down to less than 3% body fat.
It's life-threatening.
Yeah. He's like, you've got to take a day off and eat as much. I was eating 15 to 18,000 calories a day. That was half the fun. I mean, it's just like anything in front of me, give it to me. And, but it was, swimming that many marathons a day is quite a test. But in that cold of water, constant hypothermia, it was just burning everything right off of me. And then probably continuing to do that hours into the night afterwards. And so I took the whole weekend off, did the gala event, went down to the beach, rested a little bit, ate like a crazy man, and then got back in and had 3 or 4 more days.
And you finished.
6 more days.
What happened next? You didn't go straight down to San Diego.
No, I didn't.
I don't think leukemia was really on your mind by the time you'd finished this record-breaking or record-setting swim.
No, I felt amazing. Both emotionally. The first thing I noticed, or actually I didn't notice it, my family did, is from the time Mary died, really the time she got diagnosed, I'd never really cried much. That generation, boys don't cry kind of thing, and I'd never really needed to. I'd had a pretty good life. But boy, once she got diagnosed and then once she died, I couldn't discuss the weather. And I couldn't ever mention her name. I couldn't say Mary without crying. And we were having a big celebration dinner right on the banks of the Willamette again. The day I finished, and everybody that had been part of the team was there. And I was telling funny stories about my life, and I'd mentioned Mary a couple times, and everybody that knew me would kind of look at me like, what? And I thought, are they uncomfortable? And so I said, is this making you uncomfortable? And they said, no, you haven't been able to say her name without crying since she died. What happened? I don't know. And now I know, how the theory of the blue mind is, and being in, on, around, or by water is almost a go-to strategy for PTSD. I did feel very different, even by day 6 on the water. From when I started, I called it the Willamette River. I looked at it as kind of a nice blue highway to Portland, kind of a recreational part of nature. And then after a couple days, I felt really akin, kind of fond of it, so I started calling it Big Blue. But then by day 6, it just felt personal. Just felt like there was something there that I was connecting with, so I started calling it Mama River. Still to this day I do, yeah. And so something really changed as my connection with nature, particularly the river, deepened. Yeah. And so I felt amazing. And the last thing, I had never gone to a doctor since 2007 and not gotten bad news.
Right.
It had been 100% so far.
So let's not go to the doctor.
Right. And so he kept calling me. Hey, Dean, how you doing? I'm fine. I'm just busy. I'll come down. How do you feel? I feel fine. Take a blood test. Okay. Didn't do it.
Yeah.
Called me up. Didn't do it. Had his kind of attack nurse. Dean, you've got to. Okay, didn't do it. And so finally they called me up. You gotta, ethically, we either have to drop you or you have to come down. We have to give you a full battery of tests. And so I did, and not until January of the next year. And so I put it off as long as, and I'd forgotten. I'd done that until I was going back through when Bree and I were writing the book and looking through my journal. I'd forgotten that part of the story. And he left me sitting in the exam room for about 30 minutes.
Wow.
I mean, that's pretty typical in an oncologist. But then he walked in and he said the words I'd heard so many times. Dean, I don't know how to tell you this. And I was just like, jeez. And then he looked up and he saw my reaction. He's like, oh, no, I'm sorry. He's like, listen. I said, what? He says, if I hadn't diagnosed you myself, and if I hadn't been treating you over the last year, I would be convinced you'd been misdiagnosed. Because CLL, historically, according to allopathic medicine, it's never supposed to go away. Once you get it, you manage it, and then someday you'll die from it. All modern Western medicine lore is it doesn't go away. And he's like, I can't find it.
Yours was gone.
Yours is gone. He said, in 30 years of studying it, researching it, I've never seen this happen.
Your experience motivated me to try and figure out what are the mechanisms? Like, there must be some scientific explanation, right? It turns out there are several.
Yeah.
And since your experience, there have been more good studies, that clinical trials, animal models that come out that explain the things that have happened to you, the mechanisms by which tumors can be starved of glucose, the way that ketones will inhibit tumor growth, even cold shock proteins that will repair defects in DNA. So these multiple lines by which the cold water immersion that you participated in to this extreme level could resolve cancer. And your story has inspired me, of course, to write a number of articles about these mechanisms, to put them into my book, Uncommon Cold, to try and give people an understanding of the way the body works and the metabolic origins of cancer that are coming from Thomas Seyfried and some other researchers, explaining that we've been looking in the wrong place. We've been looking in the cell nucleus when we should be looking at the mitochondria, because cancer has a unique metabolic profile called fermentation. It bypasses the mitochondria in order to proliferate. When you fix the mitochondria, which is exactly what exercise and cold water immersion will do, then you can fix the cancer. So you, accidentally resolved your chemo we have no idea what the minimum effective dose is, and I doubt that it's 187 miles of the Willamette River. You probably went way past that, and you were, for all purposes, healed.
Yeah.
But you weren't out of the woods. You still had the lymphoma.
Right. And Castro and I assumed that since I no longer had the leukemia, that my body would more easily ward off the lymphoma. But the lymphoma got aggressive, and it astonishingly so. But I was still grieving really heavily. I went back, and once the purpose was accomplished, I rode that high for about a month. And then all of a sudden I realized, you're still alone.
What's next?
And nobody really cares anymore. And what do I do? And I just didn't know. And I thought, well, maybe it's time to start rebuilding your life, but that didn't seem too sexy.
What life is that going to be?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't know. And so Castro wanted me to do chemo and radiation again.
For lymphoma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because it had gotten so bad, and I was just swelling up almost exponentially by the month. And so I said, hey, nature healed me once. It's got to be able to heal me again. Let me take some time and search on the internet and see if there are any research studies that would indicate that it would be good for lymphoma. And within a couple weeks, I found Dr. King Lee's research from Nippon University with men who had cancer who'd go out and do what he called forest bathing for an hour or two once a week, and their immune system would be, the NK or natural killer cells would be boosted anywhere from 50 to 200 times.
So this is coming out of Japan.
Right.
People who go into the forest to immerse themselves in the nature, and they see faster wound healing. They see improved mood. They see a boost to the immune system just from walking around in the woods.
Right. Mostly, especially if they're pine or conifer trees, evergreen trees, because they emit something called phytoncides, an essential oil that's imperceptible, but it just really muscles up your immune system.
Is there any mindfulness, or is there a part of the practice of forest bathing? Is it really just like you could put your headphones on and walk through the woods and breathe the phytokines, or is there something, a mindset that you adopt?
Yeah, it's mindfulness before we called mindfulness. Yeah, you use all of your senses and really try to let go of the past, let go of the future, and be there just as what I would call a wild human. Back in our natural environment, you see things, you notice them, you watch as a form of what's called walking meditation, or just sitting. You look at the colors, you look at the ripples that are caused by wind, either in leaves or on the water. You spend a lot of time trying to smell, look, taste, feel. And I'd been meditating, using mindfulness meditation for about an hour a day since I made the commitment to meditate an hour a day in October 2000. So by that time, I'd been doing it for 15 years. So this felt like not only going home, but having grown up the son of two mountain climbers, I was lonesome for Oregon every day for 30 years, particularly the mountains and the forests. And so for me, it was just this beautiful, almost dessert for my psyche to surround myself.
How often did you do this?
I tried to follow the research. I wanted to do it once a week, but I'm single, I'm alone, I don't have any friends. Why not? If my thinking was, if 1 to 2 hours once a week does it, or I think he was even and the results last for 2 weeks. If I go out every week, go out Thursday night, stay all night long by myself deep in the forest, because I'd hike 2 or 3 miles in, then I'd get off the trail where nobody is, and in a place where I say the trees haven't seen people. And then stay most of the day Friday, and then because I'd fallen in love with cold water, I'd get into a glacial stream and do a dip for 5 to 10, 15 minutes, and then walk out literally feeling reborn.
Yeah.
And so I would do that every Thursday night and then all day Friday. And I started that May of 2015. I told him, if my numbers are no better in 6 months, I'll do the chemo and radiation.
What did Castro say?
He's like, well, that's not wise. That's exactly what he told me.
He's giving you no benefit of the doubt.
No.
He's like, I know you cured your incurable leukemia swimming for 3 weeks, but this walking around in the forest stuff, that's got to go.
No. And he looked at the research and he's like, yeah.
You didn't buy it.
No.
I totally buy it.
But he had me, he was willing to work with me. A lot of oncologists, I'm finding out, working with many cancer patients, as I have over the last 10 years, they'll fire them. They'll fire their patient. They won't work with them unless they do exactly what they tell them to. He's like, well, I tell you what, Dean, you've got to go and take a blood test, depending on your numbers, either weekly or every other week. And my office will always tell you what it is. Right. I said, I can do that. Yeah. And so I did. I started it, though, May of 2015, and by March of 2016, my lymphoma was gone.
Wow.
Yeah.
You mentioned the phytokines. I think there's something that you might be downplaying, and that is the light in the forest. Yeah. There are 2 wavelengths that dominate the forest light. So when you're going out in the day, this isn't the same thing if you're walking around at night, with a headlamp or something.
Right.
But during the day, there's the green, of course, that's the leaves. And then there's the near infrared. People don't realize that the plants will reflect out near infrared. And so you are bathing yourself. This forest bathing metaphor is really good, both in the green lights that goes through your eye and the near infrared light that is penetrating your body to several centimeters below the skin, stimulating your mitochondria. It might have been the best thing that you could have done for your lymphoma, even though the research that you read from Japan didn't exactly say why it works, just saying, look, we're getting these terrific results. Now, you're aware, I started a green light company. I've got this device called My Green Lamp because I live in Phoenix. I can't get out to the forest. It's a 2.5-hour drive for me, and I have a job.
When we were flying in today, Bobby's like, oh, the sun. And I said, yeah, but I could only handle the brown for about a week or 2. I'm going to have to go back to green.
To the green. And I see you now all the time. You are in the stream. You are up in the woods. You're getting the light. You're getting the cold. You're getting the sunshine. You're getting everything that your body needs so that it can heal itself.
Right.
And this is what I think has been stolen from us, this idea that the body is capable of healing itself.
Oh, I wholeheartedly believe so. That's why my website, and I'm trying to start a movement of rewilding called the Wild Cure Way. I don't think, I love biohacking. I think it's great. But I blurted out on another podcast, why biohack when you can biohave? You don't need to hack. Just get out where you're at, and it's already there waiting for you, waiting to embrace you, waiting to cause all those reactions we're hardwired for. Even if you're like me and you're totally ignorant and you don't know those are happening, they'll still happen. Yeah.
So this biohave is a great idea. But there are occasions. I'm not ready to, go back to living in a cave like my ancient ancestors or something like that. I live in the hottest city in North America, surrounded by my civil engineering infrastructure. And so what I do is I build these machines. We call them the next best thing to nature. The best thing would be to go swim in the Pacific Ocean.
Right.
But if you can't do that, then get a Morosco. Put a bunch of sulfate salts, Epsom salt, potassium, the zinc sulfate, the other salts in there, and get in there instead. This biohave is a really good way of thinking about it. Instead of injecting yourself with peptides or whatever the sort of substitute for a pharmaceutical approach would be, you're talking about putting yourself out into the natural environment to stimulate your body to do what it already knows how to do.
Right. And I think you're right, because I'm busy too, and I live in a nature-rich environment. Yeah. I'm 15, 20 minutes, an hour at best from 20 different rivers. I just found out 6 months ago, even though I grew up there, that Oregon has more waterfalls than any other state in the U.S.
I'm not surprised.
And many of them along the Columbia River Gorge are only 40 minutes away from me at most.
Yeah.
And waterfalls are the most negative ion-rich environment. But if you can't get there, I tell everybody that My Morosco is probably the best lifestyle hack or lifestyle addition I've ever made. It not only saved me, but I think Bobby, my wife, and Bree, my daughter, during a lockdown in COVID, because I'd get pent up. I'd start spouting all sorts of bizarre conspiracy theories.
Not so bizarre.
Yeah, well, and trying to dial in historically how I'm right, and they'd say, "Oh, please just go get in."
You need an ice bath. Hey, Dad, have you been in the ice bath?
And I tell everybody, my Morosco is poor man's shock therapy. Mm-hmm. Before I knew for sure that it was just, flooding my brain with oxytocin and serotonin and dopamine and norepinephrine, I felt it. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, my first ice bath ever was January 3rd of 2014. I knew I had 6 months before I was going to get in the Willamette. I'm sick, so I thought I'd better acclimatize my body. Mm-hmm. And I had what I called my 5,000 pounds, just this heavy, broken-hearted weight of grief that had been there every moment of every day for 3 years. And I got in, and it was probably only 55 to 53 degrees, but it was cold enough to make me gasp. Yeah. And I only stayed in about 2 minutes. I was intuitively just doing this thing. I'd never heard of anyone that did cold plunging in 2014. But I got out, and I felt different. And then I realized it was my chest. That 5,000 pounds wasn't there.
Lifted.
Yeah.
Melted into the water.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that was such a relief. I didn't want to ignore or try to escape my grief, but to know that if I just couldn't stand it anymore, if I just needed a break, it was always there waiting for me and available. But with my licensed clinical therapist brain, I was like, but I didn't have to journal. I didn't have to do cognitive behavioral therapy. I didn't have to meditate. I didn't have to do breathing. This can't be that easy. And so I waited, and in about 3 hours it came back. So I got back in.
Yep.
It's gone.
I do the same thing.
And so I thought, okay.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask you to tell us a little bit about your website and the movement that you're starting, and then get you in our latest model. How does that sound?
Oh, that sounds fantastic.
All right, tell us about what you're doing.
Oh, man, I'm into a lot right now. One of the things I'm really excited about is I've developed a new wellness evaluation I call Natura. It's Nature Adaptive Therapy, Unifying Rewilding and AI. Rewilding has hit a real fork in the road. Got old school guys like me that are saying you shouldn't even watch TV or do anything but live in a cave, or definitely not a cell phone or a computer. And then you've got people that are like, forget it. We can create virtual reality worlds, and you just put on some goggles and you'll get the same benefit.
That sounds like nonsense to me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there is some research that the unconscious doesn't know the difference between vivid imagination and reality. But I think your body does in a lot of ways. I mean, you're not going to accidentally get fighting sides from virtual reality.
Where's your red light coming from?
Exactly.
Right. Where's your thermal contrast therapy coming from your virtual reality? Yeah.
Well, and what's happening with the 5G and everything when you got those on. But but I don't like forks like that. And it hit me, oh, no, wait a minute, we've got AI. Why don't we use it? Because one of my most common DMs is, Dean, that's all fine and good for you, but you live in Oregon. I live in India or Indiana. I can't do that. And yeah, they can. You can do it anywhere. You just need to know what to do, but I would need to know their personality. I need to know their preferences. I need to know their fitness level. I need to know their geography. And most people don't want to take the time to let me know that. And I don't want to take the time for the hundreds of requests I get. And so I developed my own personality. I put my clinical nerd hat on and developed my own personality type test. And then it also helps tease out preferences and a self-report fitness mechanism. And then after that's done, I have AI ascertain and analyze within a 50 square mile radius of the residents where they can do
Where they could biohave.
Yeah.
That's very clever.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about that, and just getting people out. And they don't have to do what I do. They don't have to swim. They might want to garden.
Yeah.
They don't have to garden. They might want to sit by. I've got one guy that's had lifelong depression, which has led to relational problems with his wife.
Sure.
And so all I had him, I started trying to figure out, as he was one of my clients, and trying to figure out what his preferences were. His fitness level was very poor, but he loved, I would have him tell me stories of his childhood, and one of the things he loved was sitting around a campfire. So I had him make a big fire pit out in his backyard. He had a pretty big backyard. And every night he'd just go make a campfire and sit there. And within a month, his life had changed. Yeah. And so
fantastic.
it doesn't matter which element or which combination of elements you use, as long as I believe they're fun for you. It's something, it's just not another chore. Nature should never, and I think nature is hardwired to be playful, to be engaging, doesn't have to be hard work. So find something that you love to do and then do that.
Live like a puppy.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and so that, I'm doing that, and then
Where can we find your website?
it's called thewildcureway.com.
Love it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm really, probably the easiest way you can get a hold of me now, only it's becoming a full-time job. I made kind of a spiritual promise to myself that if anyone ever DM'd me, I'm not going to think I'm all that, because I'm not. I'm going to answer you back like a human would.
Yeah.
That's becoming its own problem.
It's hard to keep up with.
Oh gosh, with hundreds a day. But you'll be able to get me pretty easily if you DM me on Instagram, and my Instagram is Dean Hall Official.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dean, thanks for coming. Thanks for being part of this. Telling your story.
Just to get to listen to how your mind works is always so much fun. I tell everybody, I'll ask Tom a question and then sit and listen to his 30-minute explanation. And it's fascinating. It's not one of those times where you're like, oh, come on, give me a chance to speak. It's oh, wow, I'm learning. I always tell everybody, one of the parts I adore about you and our friendship is that a world-class oncologist couldn't tell me why I healed. But after a month or two of thinking about it, you did.
You're not the only one.
Yeah.
The things that I've learned from you have been really important for me to help other people that I care about heal as well.
Well, that makes me very happy.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Let's see if we can get you in the ice.
Yeah, let's do it.
Thanks, Dean.